listen or do you hear?
Mm.
Is there a difference? Are they both useful? Or is one better than the other? Welcome, everyone who's joining us today and those who will be listening and watching the replay. That's our topic for today, hearing and listening, because I personally believe they're both important. I think listening has to do with really understanding what the other person is saying. But I think hearing is also maybe what's not being said, also. That you're hearing certain things, but maybe there's more to that conversation that's kind of under the surface. So when you hear something, this is what I'm hearing, but I'm thinking, or I have the feeling that there's a little bit more to this. Or why aren't we talking about this also? So, because when you're listening, you're really busy engaging in that conversation. Listening gives you a little time to think about what that conversation is about. And before I introduce my partner this morning, I'm going to tell you, I'm Teresa Palmer. I'm a holistic cardiology nurse practitioner. I've been hosting this platform for close to a year. I'm actually guest hosting it, and we have a great time with this. Mindful Mondays and Motivational Mondays are all about giving people these little nuggets of information that we hope resonates with you. Take what you like, and if you don't, that's okay too. But we do appreciate your support. We do appreciate you listening. And we do appreciate you being part of the Own It family. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline, who could introduce herself and start the conversation going.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's always a pleasure to be here on the platform with you. I am Jacqueline Brown, and I am your sovereign leadership architect. What does that mean? That means that I truly specialize in helping leadership operate in self governance first and understanding what that is and actually perfecting leadership from the inside out and building, building stronger leaders to come along as we are aging, and sometimes maybe we age out because we get older, but really honing in on what does the next generation of leaders look like, what do they need to be equipped with. And so I'm so honored to be here on Motivational Mondays with you, Teresa. And thank you for the topic, hearing and listening. Wow. When I think about hearing, I think about hearing being exposure to sound, hearing, exposure to sound. When I think about listening, because we can hear things, I can hear that there's things going on outside of my home. I can hear that sound, and that sound travels. And listening, now, listening, active listening, which is something that is it's a big focus when you are being certified for any type of behavior analysis coaching. When I went through the International Coaching Federation for certification years ago, and when I went through Women in Leadership certification years ago through the University of Virginia, the Executive School of Darden, there was a lot of emphasis on active listening. And so when I think about listening, I also take it just a step further from active listening to listening with governed interpretation, I'm going to say. And why am I saying governed interpretation? Because sometimes we have to make sure that we are listening for what is really being meant. We may not totally listen from a perspective to understand, And when we don't listen to understand, that's where misinterpretation can come in. And so I look at listening as being a disciplined restraint. And why do I say that? Because sometimes we have to discipline ourselves that even when we're hearing something that we may not agree with and we may not like, as a leader, we are responsible in how we deliver a response. And because we listen to understand, because we actively listen, this gives us room to speak very powerfully without sounding like we are defending our thought, or we're defending why we feel or think the way, or our opinion is the way that it is. So I think the listening part, Teresa, is so very important, because when we listen to understand, we sometimes can reframe maybe a position that we were going to take. But if we're actively listening, we can have a different way of looking at something so that we're more effective in our listening. You know, there's being right, and then there's being effective, and it's deciding which one do you want to be. Do you want to be the right person in the room, or do you want to be the most effective person in the room? And to be the most effective person in the room, we have to listen for more than sound. So we're hearing words, we're hearing sound, but are we actively listening so that the words are really penetrating our brain? It's connecting with our heart, our intellect, and we've got that active listening going on there, from the perspective that we are not necessarily listening to respond in a defensive manner or whatever our opinion is, but we are listening to the context. You can actually listen for intent, you can listen for pattern, and you can listen with responsibility, so that when you respond in a responsible manner. And I'm going to kind of toss it back to you, because
Yeah.
I could keep going. This is such a
Ah,
great conversation.
yeah, I like what you said. One thing for me is, because I work in the healthcare profession, I'm a nurse practitioner, I have to hear and listen, because a lot of times people come in and what they're saying isn't everything. Because a lot of times they either fear, they may think something's not important. So you have to really hear what's being said.
Mhm.
And you also have to listen underneath that, that there's a lot more going on than a lot of times what people will really tell you. So I think that listening and hearing kind of goes hand in hand.
Mhm.
I think listening is more the active part, where listening, you're really engaging in that conversation. You're really interested, especially with others' opinion, you're really interested in what is being said and how it's being said. And you're engaging in a conversation. Hearing is important, and hearing is a part of that, because you have to know what you're listening to. So hearing gives you that opportunity as to what's really being said. You know, how is it being said? Is there more to this? Are there some things underlying? So that way, what I'm hearing and what I'm listening, when I'm listening to it, then it gives me the opportunity to ask people more questions, to ask them either to clarify something, or to even get a different perspective on something if I'm listening to somebody's opinion. And I think that's so important. You know, it's just really important that we hear and we listen, and that we don't think of them as two opposites. And I know there used to be the thought that, okay, if you're just hearing something, you're not really listening to it, but you are. You
Mhm.
know, you're hearing what's being said, which is really, I think, has to do more with your brain because you're kind of going through that analytical part of what is being said. What am I hearing? I'm hearing this person say X, Y, and Z. I'm hearing this, but when they said that, I'm also thinking that this other thing could be a part of it. That's the brain. When I'm listening, I'm really listening more with my heart
Mhm.
because I'm really tuning in to that other person. I'm tuning into what they're actually telling me.
Mhm.
Why is it important to them? You know, why is that opinion important to them? Obviously, it's important, or they wouldn't be talking to me about it. So I think that's where we kind of get caught up. And I think, especially with situations that happen in our environment, and that we hear it and we say, "Oh, I don't want to hear that. I'm not interested in that. Oh, I don't think that way." And right away, that's telling you that's the brain. But if you open your heart, there may be nuggets in there that resonate with you that maybe you never thought they would. But now you're listening to have that opportunity to understand what the person is saying. And understanding it and hearing it are two different things. Hearing it is hearing the words, using your brain, that analytical computer that we have that says, "Oh, I like this. No, I don't like this. Oh, why are they saying that? Oh, that person has the wrong opinion. Oh, that person's not right about that. I would never think that." But that's when we tune in with our heart, with our listening, and say, why is somebody thinking like that? You know, why do they have that opinion? And usually it's because they've had some sort of experience.
Mhm.
So it's only when we listen that we could really understand what has motivated that person to think like they do. So I really believe they go hand in hand. There's space for both of them. And I think if we utilize both of them, then we're really getting the full conversation and we're really understanding the other person and we're making a connection with that other person. And it doesn't matter if we agree with them or not. That's not the point. The point is that we're all connected in the universe anyway, whether we choose to believe that or not. And when we listen, we're telling that other person, you matter. What you're saying is important. I'm going to hand it back over to you.
As you were speaking, and I'm going to go to the part of you being the cardiology nurse practitioner, because my mind went to when I go into my cardiologist's office, and my cardiologist is the only one that he's the only doctor that I have that sits outside of the hospital affiliation of all the other doctors. And I've had people say, well, why don't you change so that you can have everybody in one place? And that was my desire. I wanted to have all of my doctors affiliated with the same one hospital. And I stayed with my cardiologist because he listens, he hears, because what is he hearing? Well, he's hearing the sounds of my heartbeat. He's hearing the rhythm of my heartbeat. He's specifically listening to hear certain things that may be maybe irregular. But at the same token, the reason I don't go for another cardiologist is because I don't think I'll find one that is such a good active listener. And you know how we say some doctors are really great, but they don't have bedside manner. And another definition for bedside manner is they may not necessarily be listening. They're hearing, they're hearing for whatever it is that they're testing for, because sometimes it's based on sound. However, they may not be actively listening to what's in the patient's heart. Because what's in our heart at the time, sometimes it could be fear, sometimes it could be worry, concern, it could be a number of things. And they have to listen for that as well. And then I think about leadership. And I think that listening can never be passive when it comes to leadership. And I do truly believe that we are all leaders in one way or another. And I believe it requires a lot of self governance. I believe listening requires, as well as hearing, requires emotional regulation. Because if I hear something that is going to make me upset, or you put a good point when you said, well, we may not know what is the reason, what's at the root, and so of why someone is saying something. And so I think that's where emotional regulation comes in. And I don't think that that's being talked about enough. I don't think we're teaching it enough. I'm not saying that I'm the only one that teaches self governance and self regulation in leadership. But I think that we really have to put a greater focus on emotional regulation, because there are things that are going to happen in our life. There are things that are going to happen in this world that are going to make us upset. And we're going to be distraught. We can be angry, but it requires the ability for us to take a step back and to really say, how do I want to respond to this? Why? Because somebody's going to be listening to me. Someone out there, depending on how I respond to something, or I respond to what's going on in my life, but someone out there is going to be listening. And my response to what I'm going through, that is going to kind of make a determination of how other people that are going to hear and that are going to be listening to me. So I think that there's a lot more thought probably that needs to go into this, that we always want to make sure that as good listeners, we have the ability to discern what is underneath. I think that that's important, because then this way we also have the ability to help guide people. And then we have to decide what responses protect people and what responses take us out of integrity, because that can happen as well. So I think that, Teresa, you brought up a really good topic here today about hearing and listening. And this is probably bigger. And I hope that our listening audience sees this as much bigger than what we'll even have time to go into today. Because when I think about the hearing and the listening, and you're right, we don't want to separate the two. One is definitely biological, because our ears and our hearing and our ability for our brain to process what we're hearing, that's biological. Listening can also be behavioral. When we're listening, hearing is receiving the sound of the voice, but listening, I got to go back to that self-governance. Listening requires us to self-govern ourselves and not jump to conclusions, not want to automatically think that we can react and not emotionally regulate ourselves. Because if we don't regulate ourselves, and if we respond with a lot of emotion, or a lot of, I'm going to say, things that we may be going through, then now somebody else has the potential to be hurt, or we don't know how that is going to make them feel. But I think the onus is on people like you and I that coach and teach about the heart and the mind. And I really think that it's important for us to continue to do the work that we do and to continue to let people know that we care about how they feel. We care about what they feel, why they feel it. But we also are here to help people to channel that so that they don't hurt other people, because somebody else may not understand what you're going through. And you can actually cause a lot of damage. And so, this is why it's just so important that we are not automatically dismissing the importance of hearing and listening. And I'm going to pass it back to you.
Uh, I was just looking at the chat, and someone has mentioned about positive psychology with
Mm,
hearing and listening. So
hmm.
that's also a direction to go with it,
Yes.
with the positive psychology and the hearing and listening. And I think you're right. This is much bigger than what we even think it is,
Hmm.
because I came across a post that I thought was so interesting, and
Hmm.
it was talking about a person who was deaf that owned a bakery shop in Washington, D.C.,
Hmm.
and how they communicated with their customers and why this place was so special and so popular, because they really felt that the person, even though they couldn't speak, it was done with sign language, that the person was so engaging that they were really, they felt, a couple of the comments in the post were, well, I went in there and I felt this person heard me more than anybody else has. They really listened to what I was saying and really went out of their way to make me comfortable. And I
Hmm.
thought, that was something I haven't really thought about before. Hearing and listening, okay, you may not be able to hear it all, but that doesn't mean that with another method you can't listen. And even hearing, does it have to be with our ears?
Hmm.
Or could you hear with our hands with sign language?
Hmm.
Could you hear maybe through vibration?
Hmm.
There's different ways of even being able to hear. And I don't think we always realize that. When we think of hearing and listening, we automatically think of our ears. But there's so much more involved with that. Visually, if you're using sign language, it's that visual hearing. You're looking, and that brain then is processing what is being said through the sign language interpretation. And that person's listening because they're using their heart. The heart is not affected whether you could hear or whether you cannot hear through your ears. Your heart is totally separate. So your heart is taking in this information, and your heart is processing things, and your heart is giving you that connection with somebody else. So we don't even have to be able to hear traditionally.
Hmm.
And by that, I mean just with our ears. We could hear any number of ways and still listen and still get engaged with things. So I think that's really the miracle of human beings and also animals in our connection.
Hmm.
We hear an animal bark, but
Hmm.
we could also listen to, what does that barking or that noise or that howl or that chirping, what does it mean? Because animals have different ways of communicating. And when they're communicating, especially birds, when birds are communicating, their communication is also hearing,
Hmm.
because they're hearing what the other bird chirped to them, but it's also listening. What does that chirp mean?
Hmm.
And I happen to live on a lake, and we have different birds. We have some ducks, some geese, even a couple of flamingos. And it's really interesting because when you hear them having their little conversation, and all of a sudden everybody one by one will follow each other into the lake, or you hear a chirp or of, I'm going to call it a voice, from a tree or from the land, and all of a sudden everybody scampers and they go someplace else. So it's really interesting how this hearing and listening comes about. And that's kind of how I picked the subject. I was sitting in my gazebo and I'm watching and I'm listening to these birds and the geese, and I'm thinking, wow, they really know how to communicate. They're better sometimes at communicating than we are. So, we only have a few minutes. So, what else would you like to let our listening audience know about this?
Wow. You know, I love where you brought up about the communication with the animals and the communication that I also thought about our body language and how we can draw people into listening better based on our body language and the sincerity of our tone and how we're speaking. And when I think about that, I remember taking a course one time, and this was years ago, and it was on effective speaking. And one of the examples that they gave us in the class, they gave us a list of people that had been deemed great speakers based on being able to draw you in. You could be a great speaker, but at the end of the day, did you draw the person in? Did you touch the person's heart? And so President Bill Clinton was on the list. And so we had to study these videos and we had to write different things. And I had never really analyzed, you're in a class now, so you're looking at things differently. And I had never really analyzed how he actually spoke. And the things that I noticed is that he had a tendency when he was speaking to put his hand on his heart. He would walk the floor. And in a very subtle way, he'd put his hand on his heart. And he would do things through body language that I was like, okay, that's how, because I would hear people, we were reading comments that people had written as we're studying this. This is all part of the class, and you have to understand, well, why and how did he get rated as being an awesome speaker? And it was all of these things that people were writing, and I'm watching this on the film where they matter, drawing people in, because listening doesn't mean that we surrender our standards and we agree. It means that there is something taking place in the other person that's drawing me where I'm saying, and we don't realize it. No one was probably realizing that the fact that he was walking and moving across the floor a little slower, and maybe he was taking his time as he was speaking and his pauses and putting his hand on his heart. They may not have known that those were things that actually draw people in. And so I guess what I would close with is that listening means that I'm really disciplined enough to hear the individual before I respond. And then I'm going to be responsible enough to govern my response in alignment with whatever my beliefs are. If I have a business, my branding, I'm going to make sure that I govern my response in such a way that I'm able to identify. And my grandmother used to say, well, we're going to agree to disagree. And that's because she was a great listener as well. And so she would say, yes, I'm just going to listen with discipline, but I'm going to also agree that we're going to disagree on this. And a lot of that goes back, Teresa, to being self-governed. we have to make sure that we are governing ourselves from that center place, which is our heart. And that's where we always come back to, is the heart, not just the intellect alone. Because you know what? Pain, when the mind is going on its own, pain can magnify a lot of things and prevent us from really hearing what it is that may be in the heart of the individual. So I hope something that we've said really helps folks when it comes to listening and hearing.
I agree with you. And I think for next week, I think our subject should be how do we engage people with body language? Because it's so important. I'm a Toastmaster and we do speech evaluations. And that's where the difference between hearing and listening comes in. Because if you get somebody who really doesn't understand what you're evaluating in a speech,
Mhm.
they're going by what they're hearing.
That's
The
right.
person said this, the person used these words, whatnot, the length of time that they spoke. When their person is listening, it's did they engage me in that topic?
Mhm.
How did they make me feel? Because people will forget what you said. They'll never remember what you said,
Yeah.
but they will remember how you make them feel.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm going to close with today is that when it comes to hearing and listening, yes, they both have a place. Yes, they go together. But always remember that regardless of what kind of conversation, what kind of talking, speaking, whatever it is, people are going to forget what you said, even if they're actively and totally listening, but they are never going to forget how you made them feel. So with that, I will close. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We had quite a few people that were watching. They were kind of going in and out, which is a good thing. Please watch the replay so that if you are kind of going in and out and surfing the channels, that you get the full account of what we were talking about. And as always, we appreciate everyone who listens to us, and I hope that we gave you something to not only hear, but to listen to. Thank you so much.